Miss Franny, can you hear us? Okay. Good, how are you? Yes, sir. Stuff in my face before the meeting. Sorry. Bobby. Oh, feeling and dealing, jiving and shucking.
Now, before you do, this might be the last for the summer for me. Feel free to set your schedule. I don't think you're gonna be expecting big crowds this summer.
I'm Mr. Hoagland.
Did you, by the way, did you get my? On the channel?
For the summer?
Well, I'm gonna be in that.
After I hung a picture and he was like, what did you do? I don't understand. I just want to make sure that she's good.
Right.
Would it be shared? John, you have Brandy's cell phone number?
What's that?
First,
I don't know about that young stuff anymore.
I just want to call and make sure that she's on. Well,
Yeah, got her on there. We're just
or can you call her?
Couple of things.
Okay, that's a start. Bobby.
okay. I don't know about that, so we'll see. Gotta get three in. Let's.
It's a rainy day.
They're right. Afternoon. Welcome everyone to today's Finance and Administrative Committee meeting. Are we in compliance with FOIA?
Yes, sir, we are.
Thank you. Could kindly call the roll, please?
Yes, sir. Mr. Stanford?
Here.
Mr. Alfred?
Here.
Mr. Brown?
Here.
All account for, sir.
Thank you. Mr. Ames is excused. Next, we'll have the adoption of today's agenda.
Move adoption as written.
Second.
All in favor? Approval of our minutes from our regular meeting of May 16th, 2023.
Move adoption as written.
Second.
All in favor? Next, we have appearance by citizens. If there's anyone that signed up to speak today.
Yes, sir. We have first Mr. Skip Hoagland.
Skip Hoagland, Windmill Harbor. On your website, it says, again, the Finance Administration Committee reviews and analyzes the town's budgets and financial statements, including balance sheet management, vendor contracts, accommodation tax funds, and the town's designated marketing organization. I'd like to see some of this. None of this I'm reading is your fault, Alex. Committee monitors the performance of the town's designated marketing organization. What have you monitored? Why do you keep handing millions of Bill Miles, who refuses to show his accounting and operates as DMO in complete violation of many state and federal laws? Why are all ATAX committee appointed and all tied to the chamber, not independent? They've never seen accounting, and they keep voting to recommend funding to this chamber. You determine the manner and method which the town will conduct an annual performance review of the town manager. Will Orlando, Troyer, and Coltrane agree to a forensic audit? If not, why not? How else can you determine if everything is being run properly? Does excessive legal fees not concern you? An illegally operated DMO chamber with millions unaccounted for not bother you? Do you consider this gold standard town management performance? Build and maintain relationships with local, state, county, and federal government departments. Have you talked with anybody about the missing millions of ATAX and hospitality funds? Have you called the AG, the Treasury, the FBI, the IRS to seek help? You need to. You receive periodic reports from the representatives of Beaufort County, the legislative delegation. Where are the copies of these reports? And what do our state reps say about all this illegal chamber behavior and missing of these millions of dollars? Work with regional governmental bodies such as the Beaufort County Economic Development Corporation, the Southern Low Country Regional Board, and Low Country Area Traffic Committee. What has been accomplished with each of these, and can you furnish these reports? I'm particularly interested in a traffic study. This last Saturday, it took me 2 hours to get from I-95 to Windmill Harbor, and then I could barely get into Windmill Harbor. As you know, there's no light there. Alex, we have many town employees and CPAs. The CPAs I refer to, again, are not certified public accountants. These employees are what I call can't produce anything officials. I will be bidding this year to be one of two of the new DMOs to replace the illegally operated DMO chamber we currently have in this position. I understand there'll be other ad agencies and media is also bidding for this contract. So I'm giving y'all kind of fair warning to be prepared for this, because the presentations are going to be lengthy, they're going to be detailed, and they're going to spell out every violation and every way you got to do it legally.
Thank you, Mr. Hoagland. Anyone else? Who there?
Yes, sir. We have Miss Lynn Greeley.
I'm here, I've submitted a POA, I'm just stating this for the record, and I thank you, Alex, but I've submitted a POA, which will give me the right to speak for Ms. Greeley until 2024. I'm not trying to take advantage of this, I'm just doing it because she can't be here, and she wants me, and she's a little afraid of making her speech. So, this will help you out on what's coming. Well, she's in fear, of speaking, literally. Okay, so look, Google South Carolina accommodation tax and hospitality tax laws. According to ATAX law, both the higher DMO chamber and the town of Hilton Head are breaking many South Carolina and federal laws. That's a fact. 30% of aid tax funds must be used only for advertising and promotion of tourism to develop and increase tourist attendance with a higher DMO. They cannot sell advertising for private profit or own the website hiltonheadisland.org versus the town ownership. What happens to this tax-funded website when a new DMO is hired this year? Why has 1.5 million taken to Canada to develop a website versus locally? This is extreme abuse to local companies and even the chamber members. To manage and direct tourism promotion funds, a municipality or county should select one or more organizations such as a chamber, visitor and convention bureau, regional commission, which has an existing ongoing tourist promotion program. This is illegal to fund a nonprofit chamber to run any kind of business under IRS 501-C6 nonprofit tax codes, and it needs to be fixed. This must be a hired ad agency, a local tourist media, or even the local newspaper. However, setting up a South Carolina arm's length nonprofit is easy, but it's not needed, nor is it legal. A municipality or county should distribute the tourism promotion funds to one or more organizations elected or created to receive them. Again, the town could run the DMO in-house, just hire an ad agency to manage these funds. That's what you should do and what others are doing. Before the beginning of each fiscal year, any organization receiving aid tax funds from a municipality or county should submit for approval a budget of planned expenses. At the end of each fiscal year, an organization receiving funds shall render an accounting of the expenditure to the municipality or the county which distributed them, and then comply to an aid tax FOIA by a citizen. We've never received any accounting from Bill Miles. Council is an aid tax violation, and worse, Bill Miles told you all to go the opposite of heaven. He's not going to give it to you. Aid tax funds must be used to pledge cannot be used to pledge as security for bonds or retiring bonds. Many questions on millions of many questions on millions of hospitality tax funds used for bonds that have disappeared and unaccounted for. And this involves a Burr Foreman law firm, also Bill Miles and the chamber lawyers, and the Burr Foreman is the only law firm that sits on the chamber board. You need to call the FBI. You guys need help. You really need, seriously, you need to get help. Again, myself and assume others will be bidding for this new DMO job this year. Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else today?
No, sir, that concludes appearance by citizens.
Thank you. We welcome Councilwoman Bryson, who's with us today, Councilwoman Becca. Ms. Becca, you are more than welcome to join us on the dais, being that you are the alternate to this committee in Ms. Dane's absence. Sure, absolutely. Today's new business will be discussion of municipal installment purchase revenue bond. We'll have our finance director, Mr. John Troyer, present to us. I believe we have some guests that are going to assist as well. I'll let you introduce them as you see fit, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, today we have a preliminary discussion, and so feel free to stop. We'll answer questions along the way. We are just here to share some information and hopefully provide a framework for a discussion and let the committee have a discussion about this. We should have Franny Heiser, a bond counsel, online. She's available for questions, and she'll have a few comments later. And then we have also with us Brent Robertson, our financial advisor, and they can talk a little bit later about their roles historically for the town and some of the services that they have provided in the past. A couple of highlights from the budget. I think it's important. Last. I'll try to speak closer, Mr. Hoagland. Okay. Debt reduction. We've been in the last 4 years, 16 million in principal each year. This past year, we did pay off our Hurricane Matthew bonds, and that was an opportunity, I think, to pivot for the town, from looking backward and recovery from Matthew to looking forward. And this is a good moment in time to take an assessment of what our future might be. And so we have increased our financial position, we decreased debt, and increased assessed values since then. We are on tap. Our capital plan in the last couple of years has planned for issuing a lease for fire trucks. With our supply chain, our fire trucks haven't been able to be delivered, but we have said that we will issue a lease in order to pay for those fire trucks when they are delivered. And so that is another form of debt, and that's just what the capital plan has called for. Here's a little. Here's our budget for the debt service fund, and you'll notice that one thing that I think is really interesting: the property taxes pay for our GO, or our general obligation bonds, and the transfers in pay for the specific special revenue bonds. And so you can see the beach preservation fees pay for the beach bonds, the hospitality fees pay for the hospitality tax bonds, the tax increment financing. Those revenues pay for the TIF bonds, and the real estate transfer fee pays for the real estate transfer fee bonds. And so it's a good distinction. It's good. It shows a little bit of the history of what has happened. You can see the Natural Disasters Fund did pay for the natural disasters bonds, or the Hurricane Matthew bonds, and now they're paid off, and you can see that there. So I think it says a lot. It speaks a lot about the town to be able to have such a diversity in methods of payment, different diversity in bonds, and so they all have their different purposes.
John, where we see no longer having to pay the bond premium, principal and interest for natural disaster, are those funds that have gone in the past still moving forward to increase the natural disaster fund?
Yes, we are still actually, in just a couple of weeks ago, we still are pursuing and still collecting money from FEMA for Hurricane Matthew. And so it wasn't a huge amount of money, but it was a little bit. And we are still, thank you, Heidi, in my office, who continues to pursue that and has been successful in doing that. And then also the Natural Disaster Fund gets credit for the interest that it earns. And so that helps accumulate the balances as well. Yes.
The budget that we have approved includes continued funding of the Natural Disaster Fund.
Well, it preserves it, and so it's there. And so it was, the additions were reimbursements from FEMA, reimbursements from the state, interest earnings, and the 5 mills. And so the 5 mills is expired. That's not, it is still earning interest, and we still are collecting from FEMA and the state, although those numbers have dropped from what they were in the past.
My question has to do, are we continuing to increase allocations to the Natural Disaster Fund? Because we know we've got inflation and the expenses are going up. So I just need the comfort that that is there.
It is there, yes.
Thank you.
And so
Fund is there, but you're not contributing from city funds any additional amounts at this point. Is that correct?
other than just
Other than
Interest
interest
that it
payments and
earns,
collections from FEMA and so on, just those, but no further budget contributions.
that's correct.
Thank you.
John, I think it's important, to better understand the situation. I get the questions that are coming from my colleagues here. We did adopt policy that increased our contribution to our general fund to create capacity in case of a natural disaster. Is that correct?
That is correct. And so, yes, and that was a policy decision of town council. And so town council raised the reserve requirements for the reserve policy for the general fund to help us. And so I think that's, I apologize to Councilman Stanford. It's like, okay, I'm thinking the natural disaster fund, but really what you're talking about is the general fund with a reserve policy that's been increased. And yes,
We need our
have
reserve
increased
to
that.
continue to increase for natural disaster exposure, for sure.
And so because the policy is a percentage based, and so the town council raised the percentage reserve requirements, as the budget increases, then the reserves increase proportionately.
Right, as I recall, and correct me if I'm wrong, those discussions throughout the last year and a half, 2 years, probably more than that, we have been very cognizant of the relationship to inflation and costs above and beyond what we had seen in Matthew and planning for that and leaving ourselves enough credit should we need to even go further, correct?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, and also one other way the town council voted to help prepare is that they increased the amount that the town sets aside of borrowing capacity to a minimum of $20 million, just in case. And that's how much was borrowed temporarily after Matthew to help with the initial clearing of the roads and just to open back the island. And so $20 million is set aside as general obligation debt capacity just for that one purpose.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, John.
I have another question. From 22 to 23 in the beach preservation fees, it's the one category where you notice in the new adopted budget, there's a significant increase of monies. I'm assuming that's related to the amount of tourism that also increased over the last couple of years. The anticipation, I believe we've all been a little bit hesitant and cautious and conservative in our thoughts as to whether or not that would continue to grow at this significant rate. Do you have any?
And also connected to that is the activity that's directly associated to beach ambassadors to trying to keep up the beach parks. So we're allocating beach preservation fees for those activities, and it's more than it has been, yes. And so the thing that, and you'll see it a little bit later, is that we're on a cycle for beach renourishment, which is expected to start next year. And I think that needs to enter into our thought process or our discussion of where do we go from here.
Thank you.
This slide is just reiterates that we have a good diversity of sources to pay our debts, and most jurisdictions don't have this luxury. Principal and interest, the thing I like about it, one, you'll see that there's provided for new debt, is not required, and so it was part of the budget process, but there's been no decisions, and so we're here to talk about if we were to do something, what might it look like? And so we hope it's just a helpful discussion. And I would point out that in the budget is 12.9 million, almost 13 million, interest of only 2.8. So I feel good about this is a good position, and the town is making good progress toward reduction in its debt. Again, we're just showing the vast majority of the debt money is principal. Here's a detail of our outstanding bond issues. You got your general obligations, you've got your special revenues, and you got your stormwaters. And stormwater fund is a utility, and it pays their stormwater from the stormwater fees direct from the stormwater fund. And so if you wonder why, well, how come stormwater bonds are not there in the debt service fund? It's in the stormwater fund. Debt balances, this is one I'm really proud of. Since Matthew, there was some funds borrowed in the wake of Hurricane Matthew, and since then we've made really good progress in reducing town's debt in all three categories, and the SWU is the stormwater utility. And here's where Councilman Stanford had talked about the policy for the general fund reserves is raised. And so you'll see that. You can see those numbers have increased, and our projected numbers are going to be right in line with council's policies, right where we should be. Some comments from the bond raters. They've said in the past, strong financial performance, consistent operations, long-term trend of maintaining strong reserves. And so, yeah, it's it's very important to consider inflation, consider the impact. You know, Matthew was one size storm. What if it's another size storm? That needs to be a part of our thought process. We do have a strong economy, strong management, budgetary flexibility. One thing that they did point out is that they, you know, being a barrier island, they said that we need to be in tune with resiliency, and they specifically said a resiliency plan would enhance the town's preparedness just in preparation's sake, but also from the bond rater's sake. And it's something that they're looking at. So our credit outlook is stable, but we have a AAA from Moody's, we have a AA1 from Standard & Poor's and Fitch. Why are we talking about this? Fire rescue, the truck fleet, we have a lease, and so we can, we're expected to do a transaction there, a lease transaction, but it's still debt. Beach renourishment, that's expected for next year is probably going to need some financing. If town council wants to consider some real estate transfer fee for more than just what's cash in the bank, but to be able to bond some of that and do some purchases now, they could do that. And it's, you know, all up to town council. We can consider packaging up some of these different disparate ideas into one bond issue. You have one set of closing costs, and there would be an efficiency there if we were to package that up and proceed in that fashion, is to make one borrowing instead of multiple borrowings. And it all depends on the timing the town council would like to proceed at.
John, on the fire truck lease, we've already budgeted for those payments.
Yeah.
But why do we need new debt to cover those payments?
It's for the purchase price.
For what?
Purchase price.
But we're leasing them. So we've budgeted for the payments on the lease. What's the purchase price we have to pay? I'm missing something here.
We would do a lease before the truck. There would be lease proceeds, and then we would make payments on that since. And so
I'm sorry, I'm not
What's
understanding.
the purchase we're going to have to make if we're doing a lease?
we would, it would be like if you were to buy a house with a mortgage and you still have to make your mortgage payments.
Yeah, and so my first question was, we have budgeted for those payments in the upcoming 24 budget.
Yes.
Mr. Troy, is the lease package shows up where in the 2024 budget? Which fund?
Capital improvements fund.
So as other items that are in capital improvement fund, it's showing as an outlier within the current year, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we're paying that amount within that year. It would be similar to us putting a park or so into capital improvements. Is that correct?
That's correct. And then what's in the fire rescue budget is the payments to repay that lease.
John, am I not correct that while this is phrased as a lease, that anything we're ever talking about are all is the same? It will look very much like a purchase, and the basic reason for doing it as a lease is for accounting and tax purposes, but otherwise it will be the same as a purchase. Is that correct?
That's correct. And the lease doesn't count against the town's debt capacity, right? Which is and so we can set aside the initial thought process. One is that, yes, it doesn't count against the debt capacity, and then also.
It's an accounting and tax matter. It's not a substantive big issue as far as council is concerned. Is that correct?
Right.
Well, other than it's being brought into the conversation with regard to potential need for bonding and the like. So it is an important piece of the conversation for council. And I appreciate the question, Glenn, because I too had the same question as to why it was packaged in there in this way. which I could, and I'm not going to now for the interest of time, but I have a question on a number of these items that have been bulleted here on this slide. So that's my comment.
Ms. Troyer, how much money do we have in the CIP budget for 2024, the bottom line?
$40 million.
Okay, and will we burn that 40 million in fiscal 2024?
Probably not. There'll be every effort to do that, but the expectation is it probably won't be the full $40 million.
Okay, thank you.
As the town considers different things for in the future for possible debt, there's nothing to prevent us from doing the lease, just like the original CIP had called for. Got to pay for the fire rescue trucks. That's all you have to do. You don't have to do anything more. You could do general obligation bonds. You could do special revenue bonds. We have done beach bonds to do beach renourishment, paid for with beach fees. And that was a very specialized purpose. And then we added one in there. It's an installment purchase revenue bond, which is another vehicle or facility in order to take, might be multiple revenue sources and package those together, and the town can do that. And we've got two different people who are here to talk about that and talk about the details of that. Let me introduce them. I think I've got, here we go. We've got our bond counsel, Franny Heiser, is online. We've got our financial advisor, and Brent Robertson, who's here with us today. And so let me just take a moment right here and let them each introduce themselves and talk a little bit about the role that they have provided for in the town. Franny, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can, John, and thank y'all for letting me appear with y'all virtually. Michael Season, my law partner, I think is also on. I was winging my way down to Hilton Head and came to a full stop on the Interstate 26. And when I realized it was like almost 11 o'clock and I wasn't even past Orangeburg, I was very concerned that based on a couple of accidents that stopped traffic, I wouldn't make it. So I appreciate being able to visit with y'all this way instead of trying to make it down for 1 o'clock. I've had the pleasure of serving as y'all's bond counsel now for 30 plus years, and Hilton Head has always been a leader and sort of in the forefront of various financing techniques. And so we've worked with y'all for all of these types of debts, the lease, the general obligation bonds, and special revenue bonds. In a minute, I'll come back and talk to y'all about the installment purchase revenue bonds. But Brent, would you like to say something now?
Sure. Thanks, Franny. I'm Brent Robertson with Stifel Nicholas. Served as the town's financial advisor for 16 years. And along with Franny, each one of the bond transactions that the town has heretofore used, either the special revenue bonds or GO bonds, have helped you all to structure those, present them to rating analysts, investors, in some instances, bond insurers where credit support was necessary, and then seen those to successful execution. And then similar to Franny, and I'm going to kick it back to her in a minute, installment purchase revenue bonds, while not previously utilized by the town, is a structure that has been around for, I think, pushing 25 years and has been used throughout the state by heretofore school districts, but now more cities and counties. Franny, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you. Are y'all able to hear me? I'm getting feedback. I want to make sure I'm sounding clear.
You're clear,
to y'all.
Franny. Yes.
Okay, good. So the installment purchase revenue bonds that we wanted to talk to y'all about today are a extension or a new version of lease purchase. Way back in like 1994, the town was able to do a beach renourishment through lease purchase, which was interesting because the project was sand. You were also able to, the current town hall was purchased through a lease purchase. Well, because of some legislation in the 1990s, lease purchases for capital projects went away, and you can't do those anymore. You can for equipment, like a fire truck, but not for brick and mortar. So an installment purchase revenue bond is a newer form of a lease where the town would create a nonprofit to issue debt on its behalf. The projects would form sort of the collateral for the borrowing. If the town chose to not appropriate, the town would lose the use of the facilities. And those are all things that are basically the same in a lease. We have had the Hilton Head Island Public Service Commission Corporation in existence now for about 20 plus years. And I don't think it's active now, but it would not be hard to revive it. So the reason we wanted to recommend y'all think about installment purchase revenue bonds is that structure works well when you're financing a number of different projects and you have a number of different streams of revenue that you want to use to finance those projects. This transaction is one where there is the right to non-appropriate. That means that theoretically, town council decides every budget year if they're going to appropriate monies to make the payments. We've never had a non-appropriation in South Carolina, and so it's very well received by the rating agencies and the marketplace. And it's really leveraging the credit, the really, really, really good credit of the town, in offering these bonds through an underwritten transaction. It's a form of transaction, as Brent mentioned, that school district used, and now cities and counties use them. We've worked with numbers of cities and counties on projects including parks, courthouses, etc. And we think that with the number of projects y'all might have to fund, that this IPRB structure could work very well for you. I'd be glad to answer any questions. I know this might be a new concept for y'all.
Hey, Franny, I was going to jump in and just add a couple of things, if that's all right.
Sure. Yeah. Please.
So in looking at what Mr. Troyer presented, you've got a variety of things that you're looking to do over the long term. There's beach preservation, there's fire apparatus, there's some real estate acquisitions. I mean, the whole host of things. And there's been different ways of approaching those in the past. And really, in my experience with the town, those things have been things that have come one at a time. Purchasing real estate, then maybe later on getting some fire equipment, then maybe later on doing beach preservation. All of these things seem to be converging in a pretty short period of time, which is why we're talking about installment purchase revenue bond as a possible financing approach. Another financing approach is using all of the structures, and Mr. Troyer presented this, that have been used in the past. These special obligation bonds, so beach preservation fee bonds, tax increment financing bonds, stormwater utility bonds. Each one of those is a direct pledge of the respective repayment sources. So you do a stormwater bond, pay it back from stormwater, hospitality, et cetera. The unique thing about an installment purchase revenue bond is that there is no direct pledge of any individual revenue source. You look at the individual projects or equipment that are being financed, and then you draw in those respective revenue sources. So if you think about them as individual strands of yarn, what you're doing is weaving them together into a rope. And so what consequently, the credit strength you're bringing to the table is not dependent on each one of those revenue streams. It's all of them taken together. And so each one of these installment purchase revenue bonds that we've worked on in the past, from a credit standpoint, they are one notch off of the town's GO rating. So in the case of Standard & Poor's, if we were selling a AAA GO bond, an IPRB would be in the AA plus category, structured correctly. That's pretty important because some of the revenue sources of the town don't have ratings on them. Real estate transfer fee and TIF don't. So what you're doing is you're helping to elevate those credits in terms of credit strength and consequently bring down your cost of funds.
What is our GO rate compared to our revenue bond rate?
It depends on which credit stream you're talking about. So the GO rating, as Mr. Troyer indicated, is AAA from Standard & Poor's and AA plus from, AAA from Moody's and AA plus from Standard & Poor's and Fitch. Stormwater bonds don't have a public rating. They used to at a single A, but they're no longer rated because they went into a private placement mode. Different type of sale.
So this would, you say, just be rated slightly notch below regular revenue bonds?
Well, the IPRBs would be one notch off of the town's general obligation rating. AA.
Sorry, maybe I don't have this straight in my mind. Of course, the structure you're planning of combining the various revenue sources into one revenue source, instead of using a single revenue source as pledge for a particular issue of bonds, rating, would that be slightly lower or slightly higher than a typical revenue bond rate?
The rating would be higher than a typical revenue bond. So what happens is that, and Ms. Heiser spoke of this a moment ago, it is an annual appropriation by the town. And so an annual appropriation pledge, from a credit standpoint, is going to be one notch off of your underlying GO rating. So if you're a AAA from Moody's, your appropriation credit, which would be an IPRB, would be at a AA1.
Have you or Burr Foreman discussed this with the bond rating agencies as a possibility?
Not specific to the town because we were waiting from direction from Finance Committee and Council. But in the past, and I'm sure Ms. Heiser can speak to this as well, and our firms have worked together on prior transactions consistently. Every single IPRB that we've done is one notch off of the obligor's underlying GO rating. So can we guarantee? No, of course not. Can't guarantee that right now. Do I have a strong degree of confidence that we'll end up at the same level with the town? Yes.
What, if any, do you see as the downsides of this approach?
I think the biggest risk or the biggest element to manage is your repayment sources over time. So one of the greatest strengths of an IPRB is the fact that in any given year, if one of your revenue sources was doing exceptionally better than the others, you just blew it out with H tax or with beach. There's the possibility that, okay, well, we're going to use a little bit more from H tax or whatever that overage in collections that we didn't expect budgeted through beach that we can use to pay the IPRBs in this year. That's a great tool of flexibility. The downside of that is that if you aren't careful and you had a really good year in beach and you decided to overcommit and maybe do some other projects related to it, and you put yourself in a position where you were dependent on it in the following year, what is the prepayment source for the IPRBs? It could be a little bit of a pickle, but then the upside of that is, or the other side of the coin is that it's not a pledge. You could look to beach preservation fees or beyond beach preservation fees. You could look to H tax. You could look to business license. You could look to tax increment financing. Any legally available source is what, if you think about this from an investor's point of view, there's a basket. And in that basket is what the town puts the dollars that are going to pay me my principal and interest when I make the investment. I'm renting you my money, and I expect to get paid every year on time and in full. From my perspective, all the dollars are green. I don't care where they come from. So if they come from beach or H tax, business license, real estate transfer fee, doesn't matter to me. As long as that basket's full, on time, every single year. So the downside scenario from y'all's perspective is becoming too reliant or too dependent on one of those individual revenue streams. But because this is something you're appropriating every single year, you're touching it every single budget cycle. You're going to get the heads up on, might have a little bit more of a tight year in beach than we thought, Let's think about that when it comes to making these installment purchase revenue bond payments next year.
Considering the current interest rate market, would you be considering a rate that is equivalent to a fixed rate for a period of time, or would there be an opportunity for adjustment in the future?
So in the current rate environment, right now, long-term yields are on the higher end than they have been in the past. And people expect interest rates to continue to increase. So when bonds are sold in the public market, what we're tending to see here is a structure that presents a refunding opportunity in the future. So assuming that the town sells a traditional fixed rate transaction, which typically carries with it a 10-year optional redemption provision, there's every reason to believe, though no guarantee, that there will be an opportunity to refinance for savings in the future.
At 10 years or earlier?
10 years is the common call provision. You're not going to get penalized by investors, but like anything else, if you want more flexibility, sure, you can look at that, but it comes at a cost. So an 8-year call, maybe we could get that if market conditions are right without a penalty. But if the town were to come in and say, well, what about a 5-year call? Or an investor would be happy to do that if you give them another quarter point. So it really just depends on what the town's ultimate goals are in terms of setting the table for the future for refinancing. And we can look at that.
Thank you.
Brett, in traditional bonding, we bond a revenue stream, bond against one revenue stream, typically. Here, we are bundling these revenue streams, and I understand the aspect of flexibility, but are we giving up the ability to bond against that revenue stream before the bond is paid off?
That's a great question. The question being, we've done these IPRBs.
I didn't say it very well, but you got my message.
Well, I'm going to repeat it back to make sure. We've done this IPRB. We're getting all these projects done, and then a couple of years down the road, we've identified something we want to do an H-tax bond for. Maybe reasons to do one of these typical special obligation bonds that we've done in the past. And the answer is no, you're not stopped from doing that because there's no direct pledge of the revenues. We can pledge the revenues if you like under the IPRB structure, but you don't have to pledge them. And so what that means is that the H-tax in this example is an intended payment source for the IPRBs, not pledged. It's intended. So in the future, if circumstances were to change and the town decides, you know what, for financial or policy reasons, I think we want to move the direction of just putting H-tax into just H-tax related projects and debt associated with that. Absolutely, you can do that. The numbers have to work, but you're not locked down from the legal provisions of the IPRB.
But the answer to my question is, and you gave it, to play it back to you, we're not pledging those revenue streams.
Correct.
Okay, and so the market says, we trust you to pay your bonds. We don't know which streams are going to come from. We trust it.
Right.
Great. I like the flexibility.
And by the way, I'm looking at Franny up here. She's larger than life up on the screen. She may not know it. Franny, if I am going off campus at all on any of this, please feel free to jump in. But in the past, the only time where we actually pledged revenue streams on structures for an IPRB have been with counties. And when they have a very large industrial or commercial project that is producing a fee in lieu of tax stream. And what they decide is we want to capture that and use it effectively to pay the bonds from non-traditional revenue sources. Well, one of the biggest reasons why counties do that is that they don't have a whole lot of revenue sources. If property taxes, or they might have an H-tax, they don't have a beach preservation fee. I don't know many that have stormwater, not real estate transfer fee. Very few have TIF. I mean, that's, Mr. Troyer pointed that out. There's such a diversity of revenue sources here. And again, the timing has to be right and the town has to have the projects to do this. But if the timing is right and the projects are ready, an installment purchase revenue bond is a really sound structure for the town to be considering, given all of those different revenue streams that you have. Any number of them, any combination of them in any given year can fill the basket I was talking about.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Short. The only difference is from a typical GO is you have a separate entity, no pledge, and the interest rate will be slightly better.
The interest rate will not be as good as a GO bond. The GO bond would be a AAA, and then this is talking a Moody's rating.
I'm sorry, better than the revenue bond.
Better than a revenue bond, better than any of the town's revenue bonds presently, yes. Yes.
And those are the basic three differences?
The other difference I would throw in there, Ms. Heiser referred to this before, is the actual collateral that is the proceeds of the bonds, that the collateral is being used to acquire or build, that is part of the pledge. It's part of the collateral package. And so the bondholders do have an interest in that collateral. And that's part of the motivation, not that the town wouldn't, but that's part of the motivation for entities using installment purchase revenue bonds every year to appropriate. Because if you don't appropriate, there's going to be an issue. And part of the underlying security is the assets you financed with those bonds.
So just like before, I have questions, and this is a new concept to me, and I'm interested in hearing about it. I'm not sure how I feel about it broadly. So before I make any, these questions have been amazing, very helpful to me as I take in information, but I'll be doing some additional research and thinking about it and bringing back questions at another time.
Thank you. Gotten some really good questions from my colleagues here, so I think I'm okay for the moment, Brent. And if Franny has anything else that she needs to add, we can definitely listen aloud for her. I think some of the questions that would further the discussion would be for Mr. Troya. But at this point, Franny, do you have anything else that you need to add? Thank you, Brent. Loser?
Yes.
Franny, can you hear us?
I can, I'm sorry, I was trying to work on my sound and it flipped me out. I apologize. I just missed the last about 2 minutes.
Okay, did you have anything else you wanted to add to the conversation, Franny?
I'm sorry, could you say that again?
Do you have anything else that you wanted to add?
No, I appreciate Brent being there and walking y'all through this. We have worked on a number of these transactions together, and it's something that could work very well for Hilton Head, the town of Hilton Head Island. If y'all are interested, we can put it together for you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you and Brent for your support over the years. Mr. Troy, I think there are probably some questions from council for you, but before we do so, I want to open the door for the public to comment or question here. Ladies first, Mr. Hoagland. Ms. Prince, ladies first. I'm going to have Ms. Prince come before you if you don't mind.
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Tell me when you're ready.
Thank you. The only question I have is whether the fact that our beach renourishment, ATAX and ATAX revenue being so highly linked to the same sources of revenue, basically our tourism business, pose any risk to our bond rating if you consolidate that in this new instrument, rather than looking at each of those sources independently. That make a difference, given that all three of those big revenue sources track with the same community metrics?
I think it's a really good question, but I think it, just our experience with the different ones, they do have a little bit different dynamic. And so they don't all exactly track together. And so I think there's support in having the different methods together. And I hope that answers your question.
Okay, Mr. Oakland.
Big trouble. This council, I don't want to embarrass y'all because if I was up there with you, I'd be in the same situation. I wouldn't have a clue because I'm not a CPA. You're not a CPA. You're not a forensic auditors. We're in big trouble. This council, I'm going to tell you, I'm going to give you my advice. My advice is you hire, we're talking about so much money, you need to hire an independent forensic auditor, an auditor to work for you, work for only the council, nothing to do with the town employees. You have got to do it, or you're going to have to get law enforcement involved. I'm telling you, we're in big trouble. This debt service fund budget revenues must be audited independently by your hired, trusted person, separated from all this. What are the lawyers going to charge you to do all this? I don't know, is it $300,000, $400,000? I don't know what Ms. Heiser's paid from Buford, but I'm going to tell you something about Ms. Heiser and Burr Foreman. I'm calling for a forensic audit on that law firm and most of their lawyers because they all control the bonds, they control the chamber, they control the GIC, they control aid tax, hospitality tax. They're a huge influence in what happens with our local government. Many of these people should be arrested as far as I'm concerned. Again, hire a CPA, a forensic auditor. Me, I'm in the same boat as y'all. I don't have a clue about any of this stuff. We got to see receipts matching invoices. You've got to do a forensic audit. You have no clue if you've got payoffs, kickbacks, waste, fraud, embezzlement. There's only one way to discover what these people are doing, and that's forensically audit them with an FBI level auditor or the IRS. I'd like to know from Mr. Troyer, where's it? Show me an audit of the hospitality tax funds. Show me where all the, Ms. Heiser, where's all here's what it says. What are the hospitality tax revenues used for? The tax generates approximately $5 million annually that is dedicated to pay the debt service on a $10 million bond for public safety projects and other capital improvement projects. It's on your website. I mean, we're hearing all these numbers, but show me the money. Where's it all going? How much has Ms. Heiser paid? Has she ever been audited? Has Beaufort County ever audited her for 30 years? You know, Greenville, South Carolina says they use hospitality funds for tourism, so there's no standards in South Carolina. It's just, you know, Mr. Troyer, show me the audit. Show me that audit of the hospitality taxes and everything where I can see that there's been no embezzlement, no fraud, no kickbacks, no payoffs. I'm telling you, you're in big, big trouble. Trust me. Call the FBI. Call for help soon.
Okay, Mr. Troyer. Oh, I'm sorry. Councilwoman Bryson, absolutely.
Thank you, Chair Brown. Patsy Bryson, Town Council Member. Hey, Franny. Hey, Brent. Glad to see you here. Thank you. I'm excited about this new financing opportunity. I appreciate the opportunity to be able to bundle revenues. So I just have a couple questions. One is, if we can bundle revenues, can we bundle projects? Or is it just geared towards financing one type of project? And the second is, what revenues do we have that are legally available for this type of funding? We've talked about a couple of examples, but I'd like to see the list of what are available. And then the last one relating to the rating of this particular financing tool as being one notch down. Is that a quarter of a point, or what kind of difference in possible interest rates might we see? Thank you.
Boy, the last one's a tough one. So working in reverse order, the interest rate, it's going to depend. It's going to depend on market conditions. It's going to depend on what other deals are in the market at the same time. I mean, there's so many factors that go into it. It's very hard to pin down what one notch means from a general obligation bond, AAA versus general obligation bond, AA plus. I'm more than happy to give you all publicly produced yield indexes that would show that, but it's going to be as of that day's market close and it's going to change from day to day, but more than, I don't have it off the top of my head, but that's something we can certainly provide as much and as often as you'd like to see it. As far as doing multiple types of projects, that's really the point of doing an installment purchase revenue bond, at least for the town. And I went back to this before, if you only had beach preservation projects to do, it probably makes more sense just to go ahead and do a beach preservation fee bond, which is what you've done in the past. It's tried, it's true, it's established, et cetera, et cetera. And you can still do that. But then if you also have fire apparatus and land acquisition that you're trying to do for a variety of purposes and, fill in all the blanks, as Mr. Troyer indicated, now you're talking multiple bond issues. There's a lot of repeated effort to get those transactions done. I mean, for instance, when you sell beach preservation fee bonds or H-tax bonds or GO bonds, they're all rated. Those are 3 separate ratings that you're paying for. If you bundle all the projects together, and again, this all has to be done within South Carolina law, federal law. I mean, it all has to be nice and tight from a legal perspective. But bundling all those projects together and consolidating them into a single plan of finance brings some of those efficiencies, like a single rating rather than 3 separate ratings. So yes, you can do a single project. City of Columbia did an installment purchase revenue bond, about $55 million for a municipal complex, the single asset. But then there's a lot of our clients who've used them for multiple assets, both essential assets and non-essential assets. And then I'm sorry, I forgot your third topic. So, if the town were to decide that this is the course that it wanted to take, and it did an installment purchase revenue bond, but it didn't do beach preservation fee projects, you couldn't use beach preservation fees. So I'm answering your question in kind of reverse order. It depends on what projects you're financing. So if there are beach preservation fee projects, if there were stormwater projects, if there were projects that were valid under state law for an H-tax purpose, those are all viable revenue sources for paying back the installment purchase revenue bond. Strip one of those out of there, though, and you wouldn't be able to use that revenue source. And you wouldn't want to. Absolutely. Yeah. Anything, yes, ma'am. Anything that would otherwise be a revenue bond type of project, that would have to be the kind of project that you're financing with an IPRB to draw in that revenue source as a repayment.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I would comment here that this is an introduction of this concept. That's all this is, and I appreciate the education that I've received here on it, and I'll be studying more, but we're not about to begin approval of such a thing. We're learning about it as we're moving forward. Thank you.
Yes, to Councilman Stanford's point, that was kind of our thought process, is one, just to introduce the structure, something to think about it, and to Councilwoman Becker's point as well, she wanted some time to process and think about this, is that this is just an opportunity to talk about it, think about it, understand what it is, and then we also need to couple that with, okay, what initiatives do the town want to take up? And so, okay, we can do a traditional lease for fire trucks, and so we're not bound by that, but we can include them in IPRB. We need to do a beach renourishment, but that'll be next year. But it makes sense to think that through at this time, to say, okay, would we do this? And there has been some talk about possibly providing some funds for real estate purchases. Okay, we can add that to our discussion. And that might be another opportunity. And if there's, I also think about too, is that the rest of our chairman asks, okay, on our current year CIP, $40 million, 32 is non-lease proceeds. That 32 million is a cash. But we'll want to do, and I think from town management's perspective, another very aggressive CIP a year from now. And our ability to fund that from cash is going to be very limited. And so I think we want to keep that in mind as we start talking through this. And really, it was kind of my intent. This is June. We come back, and you have some time to process, like, okay, what is this? How do we feel about this? What questions do we have? And then we haven't even talked about, well, how much for anything? And that's another whole, I think, another whole discussion. We would separate that and say, okay, well, how much are we talking about? And I think we need a full conversation on that.
Okay. Well, John, we thank you, and we of course appreciative of our partners here, Brent and Franny, for trying to get us as smart as possible in the limited amount of time that we had today. I think this is definitely just an introduction to the idea. Your timeline depicts that we'll get back together sometime in July. I think there's been some really good questions asked. If we can come back with sort of a little bit more detailed answers on some of the questions that have been asked thus far. An opportunity for us to not just let it sink in, but have a better understanding as to the advantages of this flexibility based on our current needs. And I would just challenge all of us to get out of the box for a moment as far as our current year's budget, right? And as you take a look back at our borrowing history, I think the last time we've done any borrowing was in 2020. Is that correct?
We did some refinancing, the last new money, and so for something that building something that wasn't there was for the Sea Pines Fire Station, and that was I think we issued in 2019. And so yeah, and we've since done a couple of refinancing. So it was in 2020. Absolutely, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So when I take a look at our strategic plan and those 15 priorities that we have identified, I'll just use a few examples. The whole idea of resiliency. Resiliency is not free. It's going to cost us money to get that done, not just the initial study. We've identified that we've got a huge gap when it comes to stormwater, as to we'll be looking at potentially a rate adjustment there. We looked at some really pretty pictures last week when it comes to park enhancements, right? So we've got a lot of activity going on. The community is looking for us to produce on those conceptual plans. And the question becomes, how do we get there? And I think this is an opportunity for us to talk out loud about a strategy to get there. So I just asked Mr. Troy that in July, we come back with those detailed answers and, potentially, kind of a peek behind the curtain, so to speak, as to what's out there as far as projects that are on the horizon that we should be considering. The councils before us have borrowed to get us in the position that we're in now. And I think it's incumbent upon us to consider what we need to do for the future of our island.
I might just add a little bit to that. It would be helpful to set up issues for July. And what I see, first of all, is this is a different structure that has been well tried elsewhere, but has many advantages. It does not encumber any particular revenues or sources, which is an advantage. It gives us annual flexibility on how we're dealing with it. It has an interest rate that is only slightly better than we'd get on an individual revenue bond. I think if you get into points like that, it would be very helpful from my perspective anyway, for council members to understand this, because ultimately we're going to get to the point where the real issues that council needs to deal with is this the right time in terms of the market? We want to take on a big interest rate that we'd be stuck with for 10 years? And things like that. Those are, as I see it, are the substantive questions that council is going to want to deal with. Most of the rest of them are technical structural issues, which all have beneficial results. And like every borrowing, interest rate's going to be key.
and it's going to affect the pace of projects. And so as council looks forward to the timing of future projects, then I think that will enter into the conversation.
If I can just add a thought on that. In the past, I think we can all agree that the reason Hilton Head is in the financial position it is because the conservative nature that we've taken towards planning and our revenue and expenses. I don't want to lose sight of that. And while I realize there's lots of people and lots of projects that are being floated out there and around, we do have to live within our means. And right now, there are some concerns with regard to economics across the country, which will undoubtedly impact us. And I don't want to lose sight of that important piece that has gotten us to where we are for the bright and shining down the road. So I'll be watching, listening, learning, but making sure that we don't take a step at a time, to Ms. Ralford's point, that may not be the right time for us to be spending money. So
I'd just like to add, I put this timeline together to answer the question, what could it look like? And that was just me. And so it needs to be a timing that council is comfortable with. And certainly the timing and the project size, we would look to guidance from the council.
thank you.
Any closing thoughts, Mr. Stanford?
I'm satisfied. I've learned a lot today.
Right, thank you. Okay, that is our one and only agenda item for today. Plenty enough time to get ready for our 3 o'clock, not being rushed out of here today. So we thank everyone for their attentive nature, and we'll find ourselves adjourned.
I mean,